One of the most wrenching experiences that can happen in anybody's life is that of divorce. Today on Austin Faith Dialogue, we'll talk to people who've been through divorce, and we'll talk about a healing divorce recovery program. Stay with us for Austin Faith Dialogue.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
We're glad you've joined us today on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Sandy Wilder, your host, and while our subject today is not pleasant, it'll be a healing time as we hear about growth through divorce recovery. Our guests today are Ann Roundtree, who's a local special education tutor. Welcome, Ann. And Larry Miller, the director of the Divorce Recovery and Family Resources Center. Glad you're here too, Larry.
Thank you.
And as we talk about this whole process of recovery from divorce, I'm struck by that title. Divorce is such a devastating experience. We've all three been through it. How did you come to name the program Divorce Recovery? Some folks might think this is the end of life.
Yeah, well, it's clearly not. It's a part of life, and as you point out, it's a difficult part. But I got involved in this work professionally through my own divorce experience and involvement in another recovery program, namely Beginning Experience, back in 1983. And from that experience as a consumer, I volunteered for several years in that program and then started what is now known as the Divorce Recovery Center in 1988.
So the center is an actual location with actual programs here in town, right?
Yes. Yes.
And talk a little bit about the programs it offers.
Well, I'm a clinical psychologist, so part of the programs are working with individuals, couples, and families in various aspects of their relationship life: pre-marriage, marriage, troubled marriage, divorce. And then in addition, I call that my day job, and my night job is running these seminars. The one that we've all been involved with is the When Your Relationship Ends. And that's a 30-hour program. It runs 3 hours, one night a week for 10 weeks and covers the various stages of recovery as a process. Because this process takes months and years, not just weeks.
That's right. It's not 10 weeks and you're cured.
Not at all.
So Ann, what was it like for you first of all, as a participant, and then we'll get to your experience as a facilitator later. But first of all, as a participant, what was it like entering the church that first night for this divorce recovery experience?
Well, I did not want to go. I had left work late that day, and I think I was supposed to be at the church at 6:30 or 7. I remember calling my brother Tim on the way and saying, "Oh, Tim, I'm on the way to go to this, and I don't want to." And he just said, "Ann, you need to go." So I went. It was difficult to walk in, and I confess I had an attitude. But I just felt so down on everything at that time. It would have been hard. It was hard for me to go to church. Mm-hmm. It was hard for me to go to the grocery store because I saw people that I knew and I had to converse. And it was hard to do anything, but this was especially hard because I had to walk in and it was like confessing, I'm going through a divorce. And so I went that night and was glad at the end of the evening that I'd gone, and I knew I wanted to take the program. So I'm glad I did.
What particularly was it about this program? Because it really is easy not to go back. In the divorce process, we all are hurting a whole lot. But what was it that you remember about this particular program that kept you there and kept you coming back?
Well, I had other fellowship, but this was a group of people who really understood what I was going through. They were going through it with me. I was going through it with them. We really understood each other. We were surprised to find that we had a lot to offer each other. And the rapport developed really quickly between us because we stayed in touch during the week by phone and then by email. And It was the camaraderie.
And a whole new group of friends,
A
I guess.
whole new group of friends, some of whom I still see weekly or monthly. I talk to on the phone, we email, we stay in touch. We're the fabulous fourth, my buddies, we're having dinner once a month, and I'm just really grateful for the friends I've made through this.
Mm-hmm. You're right. It's
Friends
a
from
lifeline.
everywhere in Austin, not just from where I live, not just from where I go to church, not just from the area where my child goes to school, but friends from all over the place.
Larry, we ought to talk, I think, a little bit about the process itself. You say 10 weeks. So what happens during this 10 weeks? What are people in for in the process?
Yeah. Well, they're in for putting up with me in some sort of a group discussion or lecture segment. We use a book in the course called Rebuilding, with the subtitle When Your Relationship Ends. So the assumption is that people will have read the assigned chapters, and sometimes that happens, and often it didn't. So we do some discussion around that. The main feature of the program, though, is the community that Ann alluded to. The material's good. You know, I add some I think, wisdom to the program, but the real essence of it is the connection that people make with each other. I think of them in kind of joking, refer to them or us as foxhole buddies, that we're undergoing a lot of the similar stress and we're hunkered down, and that kind of connection under stress and strain, just like in war, that fuses people together because of the common experience. There's nobody kind of standing up preaching down. We're all in that together, and that's what really fuses the connection that literally lasts for years. See, I've been doing this since 1985, and there's like 90-some groups now in history, and I know that people who met in class, like Ann, met her friends, still see each other after 10, 12 years. That's extremely gratifying for me.
That's right.
Really?
Some healed relationships in lots of ways. Now, I remember from the first evening, too, that you talked about loops.
Yeah.
Because my hunch is many folks go through the program thinking, let me get through this, I'll be healed, I'll find somebody else, and I'll sort of pick up with relationships where I left off. But your notion of loops takes people in a different way. Talk a little bit about what that is.
I hear so often people saying, quote, I thought I was done with that. Now that might have been anger, sadness, fear, whatever. And their underlying assumption is that you do it once and you get it behind you, and then you move on and you don't slip back. And when they do slip back, they then start judging themselves. I'm weak, I'm feeble, I'm not faithful, whatever. And what I try to point out is that slipping back and moving forward and slipping back and moving forward are loops, and that's just the nature of the recovery process. So when we slip back, ideally we just say, wish I wasn't here, but I am, and that's natural, so I'm going to move on, instead of, darn, you know, I'm losing it, I'm getting nowhere. So it's to normalize the loops on the board, is to normalize this process of ebbing and flowing and moving forward and sliding back in a real ongoing way. So again, it's back to that process. It's a recovery process, not a one-shot deal, and then we're done with our anger, our grief, our sadness, our fear, whatever. We don't get done with it. A phrase I use is we don't get over this, we get used to it. We become accustomed to this new life we're in, but it's built on our old life.
And so, Ann, then, as a participant, how did you find yourself going through that? Because you were there for the first night. You remember the whole notion of loops. So, what happened to you in the 10 weeks? What kind of things came up?
Well, one of the first things that we deal with that has to come up is the grief and the anger. And I was really surprised to hear how much anger came out of me in this protected situation that I was in one night. with just a small group of facilitators. And it was a tremendous relief. It was really, there was a lot of pain that I felt and didn't realize how much pain was there, but then feeling it brings you relief, because it's getting it out actually gets it out. It's like Larry said, it doesn't make it go away permanently, but it's very healing. Other people understand. You've got support there, and it brings a lot of relief. So you may come in feeling really burdened about what's gone on that week, but you leave for that evening feeling much better, helped, supported, relieved.
I remember for me, the grief night was particularly difficult, because that's the one issue I had wanted to tiptoe around and really couldn't finally, especially in the group. I wonder if you found that your experience of those really powerful emotions was different when you were a facilitator versus being a participant the first time around.
Well, yes, it was different, because it's like the first shell came off and shattered maybe the first time that I did it. And the next time I knew what to expect, so I'd been anticipating it for that week. So I'd been dealing with it for that week instead of coming that night and finding out this is what we do. And I really don't want to spill the beans, but
Don't spill the beans.
but it's just so helpful. It's so helpful. Going through it as a facilitator also, because you know what the process is like. I knew how much it had helped me, and I wanted to be helpful to these other people. And so I didn't kind of just let myself disintegrate again. I was there to help others. And at the same time, it's continuing the healing process in me.
And I know you've been an active participant in church for years and years. I wonder what you found happening to your faith, your relationship to God, as you were working through some of these divorce-related issues.
Well, this was really crucial for me. Going through a divorce is hard for anybody. And it was particularly difficult in my situation, because the church I was in at the time, I didn't feel the support I needed. I didn't. It made it much harder for me to deal with a particular situation that I was in, and I found that I had to separate myself from that group to get perspective, and actually, it's just so hard, because I believe that God does not condone divorce, but Christians do get divorced. And I did find real support in my current Sunday school class. It was When Your Relationship Ends group is one kind of support group, and it's wonderful. And my Sunday school class has been another kind of support that is equally wonderful and has really, really helped me.
Okay, and we'll come back and talk about our faith journeys here in a minute. We'll be back for the second half of Austin Faith Dialogue, so stay with us. We're glad you're here for the second half of Austin Faith Dialogue. We're talking about divorce recovery today. We have two guests, Ann Roundtree, who's a local special education tutor, and Larry Miller, Director of the Divorce Recovery and Family Resources Center. Glad to have you both here. And let me make sure that we get the telephone number of the center up also, so that as folks want to call you, talk about the program, talk about the whole divorce recovery process, they're sure to do that. What struck me as a participant in this whole divorce recovery program were things like, were there prayer concerns for the coming week? We prayed the Lord's Prayer at the end, all with our arms around each other, and my hunch is that's not common to every single divorce recovery group in town. Larry, talk a little bit about why you put those components in. Is it from your faith background, trying to get people back in touch with God? What do you see the importance of those connections as being?
Well, I think for me personally, my earliest exposure to the divorce recovery was in the spiritual context again. So that kind of sets my mood, if you will. Saying the Lord's Prayer, I want to say that primarily the program is a, quote, secular program. Although we start in a church the first night by my parish, St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. Thereafter we move around to people's homes. But the prayer piece, and it's somewhat controversial because not everyone is Christian that goes, and not everyone is a practicing Christian. But for the most part, that's a valued piece. I think of it as, again, part of the community, that we circle and touch each other and we huggle as we do the Lord's Prayer, and we solicit prayers for people who are in the group. If there's something happening that's very crucial in their lives, we solicit prayers in their own behalf, and also prayers for others. So we have in the program, as you know, the notion of domains, different aspects of ourselves. And very briefly, the emotional domain, our feeling parts, our intellectual domain, our spiritual domain, relational, how we interact with others, and the physical, how we take care of our bodies. So the spiritual domain is a central part of self-care, and it's helping to build community in a faith context. But again, I'm pretty careful about not being heavy-handed about that, offering other options for prayers or meditations that participants might have. But it comes from a spiritual, I guess, more than a religious place for me, this community around this real tough time of life.
I wanted to ask a question about, Ann, ask a question of you about what the program sort of led you toward. Because I remember that the first night we meet, one of the things that said, and you can refresh my memory if I say it wrong, Larry, one of the first things it said is that this divorce recovery is not necessarily preparing you for remarriage. That it's preparing you to be single, a good, healthy, single person, to be who you are, to rediscover yourself, as it were. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you felt that happening with you.
Well, for one thing, I had been so depressed. The group, being in this group, lightened my soul so much. Going through this process and being with these particular people really lightened my soul, and it started coming out of me. And I realized that I was beginning to enjoy life and enjoy myself, and it felt like other people were too. And it's turned out that way. I feel like I've had a personality transformation that has come through this healing process. And as far as my friends, having relationships as a single person, I've really enjoyed my men and women friends that I've met through this group and in my Sunday school class. And When I came to Austin 5 years ago, I'd moved from a different state, although I'm a Texan. I'd moved from a different state and didn't know anybody in Austin, and then immediately I was separated. So I didn't know anybody, and I had few resources, and this was one of my first resources. But my men and women friends have been wonderful, and finding out that I can be friends with men and not have to date them, but finding out that I can date a man friend and have a much more objective relationship than I used to be able to have. And I can just experience that relationship as a friendship and an affectionate relationship and see it on kind of on both sides, sometimes at the same time, almost in the same moment. And I've just learned so much from having this friendship that I've had with Tim. And I just appreciate being able to have the preparatory experience for that, which was going through the divorce recovery seminar that helped me to understand how friendships could be. It's just been an awful long time since I had been a single person.
Right.
And that's a scary thing.
A lot of skills to relearn.
A lot of skills to relearn, and you've been relating to a mate for so long, and then it's just such a scary thing, and not knowing if you can actually do that. But at the same time, there's a particular kind of lonesome that having men and women friends can address,
And you've also talked earlier about the lonesomeness of church friends or your church family not understanding. Now that you've been through the divorce recovery class as a participant and a facilitator and an enthusiastic supporter, what would you suggest that local church people do to be more helpful to people in the separation and divorce process? Because real often those folks with whom we share our faith can be the least supportive, unfortunately. How could they be more helpful to us?
Well, I don't recommend going through the experience so they can identify with us better, but I'll just say that going into my church, both churches I was in, the church I was in at the time of the separation and the church that I moved to a year later, was difficult for me. People just kind of withdrew, and some people just didn't know how to reach out to me. As I said, they hadn't known me for a short time anyway. But even I've spoken with one of the women who went through the divorce recovery seminar who had been in my present church for quite some time, and in the same Sunday school class for years and years. And when she and her mate separated, she just felt abandoned by her Sunday school class. And the Sunday school people, the church people, could just come alongside us and be willing to listen, and some of course were. But there were so many times that you walk into church and you feel like you're sticking out like a sore thumb because you don't fit anywhere. Well, the Sunday school group that I've become a part of embraced me. They were older couples, I'll say, couples whose children were in high school or college, so they've raised families. They've seen their friends go through divorce. They've learned how to help people cope with it. And so I'll say there was just a stability and maturity there, a perspective there that maybe some younger couples didn't have. Maybe I was more threatening to a younger couple who would think it would never happen to me. Well, she didn't think it would ever happen to her. But I'll put a period on the end of that. I tend to string my sentences together. But my Sunday school class embraced me, let me sit in there and weep when I needed to weep.
Letting you be willing to, or being willing to let you be where you were. Yeah.
Yes.
And you talked a little bit earlier, Larry, let me go off on another direction here. You talked a little bit earlier about your having done this particular program since 1985. I wonder if in the years that you've been working with these thousands of people, you've seen a difference in what they're searching for, what they're needing, what kind of support that you and the facilitators and the program can give them. Has there been a shift in who's getting divorced and what they're looking for?
I don't think so. I've not really looked systematically at that, but each group is different. I don't know of any particular trends that I'm aware of. The differentness of the groups, though, is what keeps me interested and involved after these many years, because every group's a different group. I was just talking the other night, we're in the Easter season, and Good Friday and Easter, we can look at that as a metaphor for the ending, the death of relationships, and all of that trauma that comes around that, and the resurrection that is really possible with people. And one of the most joyful things for me is having had this longitudinal view over these years, is to see people really thrive again, not just kind of limp back into life, but really sparkle. And Anne is a good example of that.
We've got a couple minutes left, so I wonder, Anne, if you have a recipe for people of faith for a healthy, successful divorce.
Oh my. Yes. It's GRACE. It's
Yes.
grace.
Yeah.
I had to give myself grace.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want a divorce. I never thought I would be divorced. I was totally committed. It wasn't a part of my vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
And there came a point where I had to give myself the room to go.
Okay.
I had to give myself grace and receive the grace that God had for me, because He is a gracious God. And actually, one of my one of the strongest Christian friends that I have is Bobby Russell, who told me, Anne, there are a lot of sins, and divorce is just one of them. And that's not to say that we should take it lightly or take our vows lightly, but there is grace.
There is great. Let's hold on to that.
Indeed.
And in the seconds left, what's your recipe, Larry, for a healthy divorce?
Well, it's a combination, I think, of letting go and letting God, and that sort of surrender, and the notion that God helps him who helps himself or herself. That we have to take charge of our life. We just, I don't think, can just passively wait for grace, but we have to be open to that.
Okay.
But we have to take an active role in our own journey.
So grace does come, and God is present even in the midst of the hurt.
Oh, yes.
Thank you both for being here and talking about your experiences. And thank you for joining us today on Austin Faith Dialogue. We'll see you again next week right here.